Hi, I'm Daryl, and this is before you buy your first EV. So this is a little bit of a dry presentation, and this is aimed at people who haven't owned an EV before and are thinking about buying a purely electric car. Mostly it just talks about purely electric vehicles, not talking about plug-in hybrids. And this could be appropriate for new and used cars, so whichever market you might be in, that'll work. So here we go. This is the main topics that are going to be covered, which is range, variance, and driving style. So this is how the range will vary compared from what the car dealer tells you. Weather and climate effects on range. So this is how weather and overall patterns of climate affect your range. Charging speed and the convenience of charging at home and away from home. How to charge, where to charge. What to expect when you take your first road trip or take any number of road trips. And how to know if there are charges where you live and drive, which is really important. If you're just buying an EV, you're going to need to know where the charges are if you're not charging it at home, or as well as charging it at home. Got a few first thoughts about range. So for anyone buying an EV, new or used, the manufacturers always seem to overstate the range that the vehicle can get, and that's because their claims are made under special test conditions. However, some people drive differently than the other people. So if you are in the good, perfect kind of test conditions driving style, then you'll get really close to your range, or even more than the range that the manufacturer says. But that's just not true for half the people. Half the people generally aren't going to make that range. And it's especially true in older cars where the battery's worn a little bit. On the day that your car is brand new, only a few people will make the manufacturer's claimed range, and they have to drive carefully to get that range. So that's how you should understand when the car dealers or websites or pamphlets tell you about the range of the car. There are a few specific kinds of tests, so I'll just give you the main ones you need to know are these things: the NEDC range, and it's also known as not even darn close. And generally what happens in there is that it's low-speed city driving, which is what you'd have if you lived in a town or village and you're not really going much out of the city. You're gently starting and stopping the car when you do start and stop the car. And so if the range of the vehicle is NEDC, then you need to take 30% off that range to kind of approximate your normal nice weather driving range on a highway. And another common one is WLTP, which is Worldwide Harmonized Light Vehicle Procedure, which is actually pretty reasonable as long as you're not driving really fast. So if you're driving on nice flat motorways and highways, you will get this kind of range as long as you're not the fastest driver. So if you're an average to slow driver, then there's a good chance you'll get somewhere near the WLTP. But if you always drive fast, then you probably won't get the WLTP. So take 20% off the WLTP, and that way you won't be that disappointed. And at the moment, these are talking about the full battery, new battery charged range. So you've got to consider that many EVs lose between 2% and 10% of their range per year. I think the average normal is about 3 or 3.5% over a lot of different kinds of cars. But you will especially lose more range for vehicles that live in hot climates. So tropical islands and deserts, those vehicles, their battery is always warm and the chemicals degrade because the battery is warm all the time. Most vehicles have an estimated range when they charge. So if you park the car at home, plug it in, let it fully charge, it will give you an estimated range of what you can drive. And the ones that estimate the range are almost always wrong. And there's another type of vehicle or a different mode of seeing the range setting where it's just a multiplier of the apparent size of the battery, which doesn't take into account how you're driving. It just has a set average for the car that the manufacturer designed. So some cars can show the two different modes, and other cars will only ever show one of the modes. So what you need to do is take into consideration that there's some part of your range that's never actually available. So what my recommendation is, the usable range is normally 50 kilometers or 30 miles less than the marketed range when the vehicle is new. And the top 25 kilometers, or about 15 miles, are essentially unusable for ordinary drivers. And the reason for this is because before you park the car, when you drive in to recharge it, you'll be driving slowly because you'll be maneuvering around the car park, driving in city streets, which are low-speed city streets or suburban streets. You're not driving on the highway immediately before you park. And so the car looks at the speed that you're driving in the last mile or kilometre or whatever before you parked, and it will make the assumption that you're now just driving slowly, and you're going to be driving slowly after the car is recharged. But of course, if you are going to go back out onto a highway after you're recharged, well, then you'll go fast and you'll burn through the power, because the power that you need massively increases with the speed that you're driving. So if you're driving slow, you get good range. If you're driving fast, the range estimate will quickly reduce. So another interesting thing is that the last 25 kilometers or 15 miles of your battery is also pretty much unusable, because in many cars, it's hard to have the confidence that the battery won't suddenly go flat as you get near the bottom of the battery. And so some vehicles, they don't give you any information about the range once you get very near to empty. So in the last 5% of the battery, some vehicles will just say, hey, you're basically run out, you should be plugging in the car now, and it won't actually give you further information. Other vehicles are different, and they might give you a countdown all the way down to 0 kilometers, and then you'll be able to work out whether the vehicle can actually go into negative range, which is not a fun driving experience. In fact, it's extremely frustrating and unnerving to go beyond the 0 point. So when you're going to buy a car, you need to work out what your actual intended purpose of the car is. So some people just have one car, and maybe you're a one-car family or a one-car individual. Other people might have 2 or even 3 cars in their household. You know, some families will have teenage children, or you live with a bunch of your housemates and you'll have a few cars. You know, have a lot of cars. So what you need to do is work out if you're going to buy a short-range EV. So you could buy a newer used short-range EV and use it for daily errands, taking kids to school, all sorts of stuff like that. And these kinds of cars are pretty good. Thus, very good utility vehicles, and you can always charge them at home. You're only ever going to be driving a few kilometers or miles away from your home, and you'll always come back to home to plug it in and charge it at home. And then your next option is a medium-range car. So a medium-range car is actually a car that can be used for all sorts of tasks, even very long commutes, and even for travel between cities. So the car that I own personally is in this kind of category, and my car gets about 160 kilometers, sometimes a little bit more, somewhere around there. And I can drive on long trips by using a charger. If I need to go 300 kilometers out of town, I'll need a couple of chargers along the way to make that distance. So medium range car might be okay for an only car, but if you're just talking about a normal family going on a big family holiday, a vacation where you pack up all the stuff in the car and go for a long drive, you want to buy a long range car, and that way you'll be able to drive quite long distances, 2 or 3 hours or more between charging stops, and that will actually be more convenient for people who need to take those lengths of journeys. And also long-range cars might be what you want if you're a taxi driver or some kind of a delivery driver, or you drive a long distance because you're in sales and you need to go to a lot of places around whatever your sales job is. One thing that's important is that you need to check that rapid charges are available along all your intended journeys, and I'll show you how to do that later in the video, along all the major highways, and sometimes you might need destination charging as well. If you've got the medium range car, you'll also need to check that there's rapid charging available along the longer journeys that you take where you'll be charging away from home. But before that, I'm going to tell you about what weather does, and in some ways what climate does to your expected range. So I'm really emphasizing a lot on range here because this is a thing that you have to really understand what you're buying before you buy your first car. So rain, wind, storms, hot days, snow, freezing weather, all of these things can decrease range. Normally hot days doesn't so much decrease your range, but if you live in a place that's extremely hot, hot days affects your charging speed, which can be a little bit of annoyance in some models of cars. But the main thing is bad weather, very cold weather and stormy weather and windy weather and heavy rain. Those are the things that decrease your range a lot. So you should expect to lose 20 to 40% of your range in wind and rain and snow. So like if it's just a little bit rainy, you might lose 10 or 15 or 20%. If it's windy and rainy, kind of stormy weather, then you might lose 35 or 40%. And it does vary a lot. And when it's very cold, if you live in a place where it's freezing, you'll lose a lot of your range, and that range might not be available all winter, because when the battery pack is just cold all winter long, it won't be able to hold as much power because the chemicals are too cold to work properly. But you'll get your range back when the summer comes around or the spring comes around and the battery warms up. The other biggest factor on range is driving very fast dramatically reduces your range. So if you know you're the kind of driver that drives as fast as you can on the highway, everywhere you go, you'll never get the expected range that the manufacturers claim. However, if you are a very conservative driver, you drive carefully and slowly, you're just a very careful, considerate, slower driver, you drive in the slow lane on the motorway or on the highway, then you have a good chance of getting the claimed range of the vehicle even, but mostly only ever in good weather. So it's most convenient to charge a car at home. So if you've got a short range car, you really want to be able to charge that every day at home for doing your errands. And if you've got a long range car, there are actually some vehicles that you can get away with only ever charging away from home, because you can use the infrastructure to charge your car and use it a lot like a petrol car. You might charge up your car once a week when you go to the shopping centre, and that will be enough for all your weekly usage. So there's kind of different usage methods there. But when you're charging at home, say you've got a house or apartment, you've got a garage or a driveway, and you're going to charge, the basic thing is, if you're in sort of these 100-volt countries like the United States, you will be able to actually charge your car from a regular wall outlet, but it only charges very slowly. So this is called level 1 charging. And you only get a short amount of power. Plug it in all night, you might only get 100 kilometers maximum on a good night for your driving range. And so if you've just got a short range car and you're only driving, say you drive 15 miles a day, then it doesn't matter. You can just use a plug-in wall charger. And if you're plug it in for 12 hours overnight every night, you're easily going to get the range that you need for every normal day. I'm in this middle ground with my medium range car, and I have a 230 volt charger, and which is what everybody in New Zealand has, because like countries like the UK and New Zealand and Europe, you have these sort of 200 volt level, all power outlets do that. And so on those chargers, if you plug in for 10 hours, you can tend to get something like 130 kilometers. You know, charging all night for 12 hours, you're going to get a very decent amount of range that you'll be able to use to make almost every kind of normal distance commute or errands or whatever around town. And then you go up to the next one, which is a special kind of power outlet that can still have a plug-in charger, or it can be a permanently mounted charger that's permanently mounted on the garage wall, something like that. And these ones can provide a lot more energy, double the other one, and you can get 200 kilometers of range in a night. So this is just better level 2 charging. And then if you go on further than that, you can get 32 amp and 40 amp connectors, which don't work on all vehicles. So a lot of vehicles with shorter range, you know, up to say 250 kilometers or 170 miles, somewhere around that range. Some of them don't even have option for 32 amp charging or 40 amp charging at home, whereas most cars that have more than a 300 kilometer range tend to have at least 32 amp charging. And that way you can get a full charge of a 400 or 500 kilometer range car, 300 or more miles a night. These chargers tend to be more expensive to install. Any kind of special charger that needs a special socket will need an electrician to install. And if you use your vehicle in a commercial way, say you're a taxi driver or a hire driver of some sort, or you have an electric van and you do deliveries, then you'll want a vehicle that can charge at this higher speed so that you can get your full range every night just when you park at home. And that will be the most convenient thing to do, because you won't have to charge somewhere else to get a full charge. One thing that's really interesting to know is that you don't actually have to charge your car to full ever. In fact, partial charging is quite a better option for many people. And this means that if you buy a car that has a long range but you just get a 16 amp charger, then it might not charge to full in one night. In fact, it might take 24 hours of charging to get to full. But if you charge it for 12 hours one night and 12 hours the next night and 12 hours the next night, when you only have a 70 kilometer commute, after 2 or 3 or 4 nights you'll get to fully charged, and then by the weekend you'll have loads of range to go out on a weekend trip. So slow charging away from home. So these level 1 and level 2 chargers can be found out at shopping centres and hotels and motels, places where you might work, movie theatres, all those sorts of things. And the level 1 and level 2 chargers, if you go to the shopping centre for a few hours to go shopping or go to a movie or something like that, you can get a significant amount of charge. And there's kind of two kinds of chargers. There's chargers where the cables are attached to the machines, where you just drive up, plug your car in using the cable that's there. And the other kind is bring your own cable, which is getting more common in quite a lot of countries. And so the bring your own cable chargers have a podium or a wall box with a socket on it, and you plug in the cable that belongs to you in there, and the other end of the cable is the connector that fits to your car, because there's lots of different kinds of charging connectors. Most countries there's 2 or 3 popular ones. Generally 1 or 2 kinds of charging connectors are commonly available on cars when you go to the car dealer. So you need to find out what kind of charging connectors the car has. And in some ways, most cars actually have two charging connectors because they have an AC charging connector and a DC charging connector. There are some cars that combine these charging connectors together, and there's some cars have their own special charger connectors, and other ones have standard spaced charging connectors. So it gets a little bit complicated that there are different ones, but generally in each country there's usually two common types, and you'll work out what it is when you start looking at cars. So type 1 and type 2 sockets on cars are the most common ones. Tesla have their own charging standards. And the important thing about BYO cables is most new cars come with a BYO cable, and you just have it stored in the car all the time, and when you get to a charger that needs it, you just take it out, plug it in and use it. And the other thing is, if you don't have one, don't worry about it, because it's only worthwhile to buy one if there's a place where you're going to use it. So if your car doesn't come with a BYO cable and you don't know where you would use it, don't buy one until you work out where it is that you'd use it. There might be a case that you go to the gym 3 times a week and there's a power outlet at the gym that uses a BYO cable, and then you'll use it 3 times a week, so it's worthwhile buying it. But if it's just occasionally at a shopping centre where you might only use one once every 3 weeks, then the cost of buying the cable doesn't even really seem worth it for the power that you'd get. So don't bother in that case. BYO cables are never used with fast charging. That's DC chargers. They're only for AC charging, level 1 and 2 charging. Fast charging away from home, DC charging. So recently there's been a lot of these chargers have been rolled out in a lot of countries: New Zealand and Australia, United States, Canada, Europe, UK. There's chargers all over the place. They can be called rapid chargers, DC chargers, ultra fast chargers, fast chargers, and usually you have to pay for them. Sometimes they're free. The chargers do not normally charge vehicles to completely full. So this is just a thing you need to know. So it's inefficient for them to charge to completely full because the battery can only be filled quickly when it's quite empty. So you think about this like when you're pouring a glass of drink, you might be able to pour the water in quickly when the glass is very empty, but in order to bring it up to the level without overflowing it, you have to slow down the rate at which you pour your drink into the glass. Because you don't want to overflow it. So think of it a bit like that. It's difficult to pack more power into a battery that's almost full, and that way it's just going to fill slowly. So say it takes an hour to completely fill your battery on a DC fast charger. It will get to 80% in the first 35 minutes and then take 25 minutes to fill the last 20%. So it's just the way that these things are. So a lot of chargers are actually programmed to stop at 80 or 85 or 95%, and then it just won't charge anymore, and it's time for somebody else to use the charger. There's different kinds of connectors. The most popular ones are called CCS and CHAdeMO. And there's 2 types of CCS, but most countries only have one type of CCS in the country. So in the United States, there's CCS type 1, and in Europe and New Zealand and Australia, there's CCS type 2. And then the other kind is CHAdeMO, which is a Japanese charging standard, and they're in countries which have a lot of Japanese cars or imported Japanese cars. And so the United States has some CHAdeMO, Europe has a lot, New Zealand and Australia have a lot as well. But it seems that the world is converging on CCS charging is probably going to be the most common one going forward. Tesla have their own charging standards which have these supercharger connectors, but they're also changing to CCS. So newer Tesla cars have CCS connectors, and China has a standard called GBT, and they just do their own thing because they don't import a lot of cars there. The interesting thing to know, important thing to know, is that DC power charging stations, like petrol pumps, just have the cables connected to the machines, and you can't use an extension cable. Okay, so as I was saying, the bottom 15% and the top 15% of your battery are hard to use when you're doing fast charging, because the top 15% charges very slowly, and at the bottom 15% you're worried that you'll be short of the next charger. So it's really, in a way, it's saying that about a third of the battery is often not very usable. The bigger the battery is, the more of the battery is usable. So when I'm taking a long journey, the middle 120 kilometer range of my battery is pretty usable, but the 20 odd kilometers at either end aren't very useful to me. It's either slow to full, or I'll be worried about not getting to the next station. So you have to think of it like this. If the manufacturer claims that it's a 350 kilometer range vehicle, then only about the middle 200 kilometers between charges at highway speeds is available for use. And then if the weather is bad, you might lose another 20%, which means that 150 kilometer range car really only has about a good 150 kilometers in the middle of it between charges. So you have to think about that. If you live in a place where it's often stormy, then you really want to buy a car with, and it has to have double the size battery of what the manufacturer claims, to make it good for doing road trips. That's just a rule of thumb there. So the converse of this is, if the manufacturer of your car claims that it has a 500 kilometer range, on a beautiful day with just the right nice weather and the right temperature, you might be able to drive that easily 425 kilometers. But if the weather is bad, it might only go 250 kilometers, and then you'll have to find a charger and recharge. Before you charge away from home, you'll likely need to sign up for a charging provider. So some free stations require an app to activate it, and some don't. So some free chargers, you need to sign up to use it, and of course all the paid chargers, you generally have to sign up to use it as well. Most DC chargers or AC chargers don't have a pay at the pump for credit cards. Some do, but they're not that common. And that generally means you either have to sign up through an app and provide your credit card through an app to activate the charger, or you have to sign up for a charging network and get them to post you a little key card or key tag that activates the charger when you get to a charger. Having RFID or key tag activation is actually pretty convenient, because you don't have to log in or fiddle around with the phone or whatever. You just plug in the car, tag the tag, and press start. Some stations on some networks can detect the serial number of the car and start automatically. Tesla and a few other manufacturers have implemented that system. Many networks just bill you once a month, and some of them will bill you each time you charge your vehicle, and some charging networks can control charges of many different brands. So that's what we have in New Zealand. There's one big network which seems to also sign up other smaller networks or brands of chargers all into the one system. So there's just one way to pay, which makes taking a long journey makes it easy, because you only have one payment method. And then in the app that the operator provides, it shows you where all the charges are, and you can plan your journey by looking at the app. When you first sign up for a charging network, you should visit a few different stations and learn how to activate them. So some charging networks have different models of charging stations. I think that my charging network, I've seen at least 3, I can think of 4 different charging, four different models of charger. Oh, and there's a new type, so a 5th, and there's a new one they haven't got. So there will be 6 different kinds of chargers on the charging network, and they all are a little bit different. And so it's good to go to each of the different kinds of chargers and learn how to use them, because it just makes it, you want to do it on a day when you're not busy with other stuff. So the worst time to learn how to use a charging station is in a storm at night when you're running late for dinner. And the best time to learn to use a charging station is in good weather during the day when you have enough power to get home if the charger doesn't work. And overall, you should just learn how to use all the different kinds of chargers: fast chargers, slow chargers, bring your own cable, chargers with tethered cables, chargers that activate in different ways. So the charging network I use has 2 different ways of activating the charger. You can either do it through the app or with a key tag. It's important before you buy a car to know the charging network and find out where the chargers are along the routes to the places that you normally drive to. So in New Zealand, we have one network that covers almost the whole country now, basically 95% of the country. And in other countries, there could be 2 or 3 networks, and some of them will have better coverage than others. And so in some countries, you might need to sign up to 2 networks so that you can use chargers from 2 different networks on a long journey. In other countries, there'll be just 1 network. It's quite interesting that if you have a look at there's 2 good apps that I recommend. One is PlugShare and the other one is a better route planner. And you can just look those up on your phone in the App Store. And actually, they also work on PCs or desktop computers or even iPads. The PlugShare app allows you to choose what kind of car you have, and I think actually a better route planner does as well. Some apps, so in New Zealand, the CHAdeMO app, it allows you to select what kind of power connector your vehicle has, and then it will show you a map of the chargers which support your power connector. So that's a good way of doing it as well. So yeah, before you buy your first car, have a look at these apps or websites, and then look at where the chargers are, and then buy a vehicle that can go 30 or 40% further than the distance between the charging stations. So you need to consider that, because whatever when your car is fully charged, the distance that you can drive, that's not the distance that you can drive between charging stations. It's just doesn't work that way. If the manufacturer says the car can go 500 kilometers, then that really means that the chargers need to be 300 kilometers apart for them to work properly for your usage. So if you have a look at some networks, you'll see that generally the chargers are spaced at half the distance the vehicles can drive, and then if they fill in the network, they're actually spaced at 1/3 of the distance that the vehicles can drive. And that way you have a good experience, because you'll still have plenty of power in your battery when you get to the next charger, and that way you can drive fast, or the weather can be bad and you won't end up short getting to the next charger. Anyway, I hope this information is a bit helpful for you. It's quite a lot of words, so it'd be worthwhile to flick back through the video and have another look at some of the stuff that I went over, and that way you can get a good understanding of what you should really be in for when you buy an electric vehicle in terms of charging and using. Yeah, just want people to have more information so that they can make good choices before they go and buy a car. Thanks for watching and listening, and check out my YouTube channel. There's some more stuff on there about cars. Okay, have a great day.